What was the biggest bullet you dodged? A few years ago I had pneumonia, but my whole family insisted that it was just postnasal drip, which runs in the family. After a week or two I woke up in the middle of the night when I couldn't feel my arm. After I got to the ER, the doctor said that it was the worst he'd ever seen, and he was surprised I wasn't dead. I had 3 pounds of mucus cut out of my lungs and another 2 weeks in the hospital siphoning out the rest. For 3 months afterwards I could barely walk half a mile without starting to pass out, and I still can't run for more than 200 to 300 yards without collapsing. Many years ago, my flight had just landed at Chicago O'Hare and the plane was taxiing when the pilot suddenly slammed on the brakes. People were literally thrown forward against the seat in front of them. A few seconds later, another plane, taking off I think, went screaming by right in front of us. No explanation was given, though our imaginations provided a lot of gory details. Around £30,000. I was driving with my wife in town one snowy evening, and we had pulled up to a stoplight. I happened to glance up at the rearview mirror and saw a city bus heading towards us and rotating sideways. I hit the gas and pulled ahead into the intersection and left into the turning lane, and less than a second later, the bus went sliding through right where our car was. It came to a stop on the other side of the intersection and fortunately didn't hit anything, but 1 second or 2 feet difference and we would have had some nice spinal injuries. My dad was a truck driver in the oil field in Canada. He worked a lot of long hours, and every single day. So on weekends he would bring me and my younger brother on some of his jobs. We were on location and my little brother, 3 years, and me, 10 years, were waiting for him playing in cab of truck. My little brother opened the passenger door and my little arms closed it. Job's done. We start our trek home going about 35 km/h and the door flies open and I get sucked out of truck. I remember doing about 10 backflips as I tumbled out, hitting the ground on my back a few times, and rolling my way to a stop. I stood up before the truck was even stopped in absolute shock. Next thing I see my dad looking for me, and he burst into tears. First time I ever seen him cry. I'm 33 now, and he still won't talk to me about it. Luckily the rig was in a farmer's field, so when we were leaving I landed on softer dirt. Not a single scratch on me. Dad thought he ran over me with trailer. Don't think we ever went to work with dad again. I work for the company now. As a kid, after running errands in town with my mom, I was climbing into the backseat of our family station wagon. A semi-truck hit a power line pole down the street causing the still live wire to fall, bounce off the roof of the car and hang across the open door just a foot or two above my legs. Raised Catholic, I wondered for a while after if I had actually died that day and that the rest of what I thought was my life was my purgatory. A friend had lost his job under suspicious circumstances. A few weeks later he asked me to take him to the bank. As I got near to pick him up I caught a train. He called to say never mind, he would get someone else. A few days later a friend sent out a message to a large number of our friends. This guy lost his job and was running a check cashing con. Can you cash this check for me? I'll pay you $50 if you do. The check is $500. He has no backing funds. You eat the whole amount. He did this to several friends in a few days to amass a few grand and was about to skip town when the cops got him. Not me, but I had a field service engineer working on one of my big robotic liquid handlers. He decided to bypass the safety pin that prevents the heads from moving while the cover is open, while he had a diagnostic program queued up on the computer. What he didn't know was that the instant he reinserted the safety pin the machine would execute the queued instructions and start moving, and he had a hand inside it right in the danger zone. I grabbed his shoulder and yanked his hand out an instant before it was crushed. He stopped ignoring me when I told him to stop bypassing safety lockouts to save a few minutes. My newborn needed to be rushed to a super high level NICU to be put into a state of induced hypothermia because he only had hours before he would suffer permanent brain damage. I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The small town next door just barely upgraded their hospital to have that hypothermia suite, one of only a few in Texas. He's doing great, no sign of any damage. I stayed up all night before a day trip to Hong Kong. You know that days when you haven't slept, you're just kinda robotic and doing the human stuff. Nearly zero awareness of anything. Well, I went across the street and my friend behind me snatched my shoulder and yanked me backwards just in time to feel the whoosh of a double-decker bus breezing past us. I just looked at him like, oh, thanks man, and it took a whole extra minute for my brain to process I would be fucking dead had he not grabbed me. Was going to move to a different apartment complex last month, got injured at work and lost hours, therefore couldn't come up with the deposit money in time. Last week some Ashad was cooking meth and caught the building on fire. Edit, my username. My current apartment complex is notorious in my city for having elevator troubles, so in reality, username does check out. Also, you could say I dodged 2 bullets. Point 1. The fire 2. I know bad stuff happens everywhere blah blah blah, but the new place really didn't strike me as the kind of place where meth heads live. So I guess avoiding those kind of people for neighbors was dodging a bullet in itself. I survived a rocket attack that landed about 10 meters from me, very close to where we were standing. We were so close to the launch site that the warning alarm came after the rocket had already impacted. Thankfully, we were able to dive under a vehicle for some shelter and the 3 of us made it through unscathed. Had a teacher in high school who was wicked sarcastic and witty, while also being a hard-ass grader. To me, the perfect teacher. Class was challenging, but we were all laughing and having a good time. He was a great mentor and I continued to visit his class even after I graduated. One time, post-graduation, I was sitting in his office and I had just given him some art to decorate his classroom with, and he was so excited he blurted, "I could kiss you." Something about the intense eye contact unsettled me, but I laughed it off. 17y/a girl, what can I say? Couple months later, he was arrested for having a sexual relationship with an underage student. I interviewed for a job that I wanted desperately in August 2019. After the initial phone interview, I went in for an in-person interview at 4 PM on a Wednesday. I had a rejection in my inbox by 8 PM and was completely gutted. Then 2020 happened, and they laid off 60% of their staff, and will probably go under. I'm thankful for that rejection every day. When my great aunt passed away I was helping to clean out her house. I'm just dragging everything out of the basement and suddenly my dad is like, whoa, put that down gently, and let's move away from here. So I put the weird metal tube type thing I'm carrying down, and get out of there. Turns out it's a mortar shell from when my aunt worked in a munitions factory during WWII. Bomb squad came and took it away. My mother left me in one state and went back to my abusive stepfather. She tried to get me to drop out of my senior year at HS, move back to their state and just get my JED. They wanted a live-in babysitter, cook, and maid. I was so lucky my grandparents let me move in with them and finish school. Edit. Thanks for all the love guys. For those who have asked, I'm doing great. I've gone no contact with my mother and stepfather. They're still together, and it's been one of the most healthy decisions I've made. My husband and my kids are amazing, and she's missing out big time. My grandparents are alive and well, and are still involved in our lives. Freshman year of college I had a calc class. It was material I had learned before, but for various reasons they didn't give me transfer credit. So I skipped class quite frequently, though I usually slept in. One morning I find myself awake at 8:30 and not really feeling like sleep. Might as well check in on the class and see what's going on. It was the midterm exam. Getting chased by someone with a knife across my apartment. I closed my door at the right moment, so that person ended up stabbing my wooden door instead. The mark was there until I left the apartment a few years later as a constant reminder of what could have been. At 17y/0 I met and married a sweet little North Carolina daddy's girl. Had I not, I would have still been hanging with my friends that just discovered heroin. Of the 3 friends, 2 are dead and 1 did 10 years in prison. Almost proposed to a girl who had been cheating on me with a pile of shit that called himself my best friend. This was years ago, and I'm getting married at the end of the month to the love of my life. Life has a way of working itself out. I had a cardiac arrest about 4 years ago. Dropped dead, in the middle of my shift. Found out after I woke up about a week later that A. the manager who saw me fall was a former lifeguard and knew proper CPR. B. an ambulance happened to be passing about 2 blocks away. C. probably the best cardio unit in my state was a 10-minute ambulance ride from where it all happened. Walked out of the hospital about 2 weeks later, full recovery. My dad was going through severe depression 10 years ago, and my life was equally shitty for a whole multitude of reasons, and it was rubbing off on me. I spent what felt like half an hour crying on the floor and working up the nerve to pull the trigger. Then when I finally did, the safety was on. I sold my gun the next morning. Wish my dad was able to say the same 3 years later. RIP. A literal police car. The police were chasing someone, and I was crossing the road and my dumbass was walking slowly, and the police car nearly grazed me. Look both ways, and take off your headphones when you cross the road, kids. Studying video game development in college. Reading about the standard of living for those people and the horrific abusive practices in the industry made me realize I was totally right to just go with electrical engineering. My great-grandfather was in the merchant navy in the war. He was in the engine room at the bottom of the ship and his friend came down to take over the shift early. Minutes later a torpedo struck and everyone at the bottom of the ship couldn't escape and died. My great-grandfather would have been one of them otherwise. Then, he was in the sea for a while and happened to be picked up by some Portuguese fishermen who saved him. Then, all part of the same tale, he escaped death again. He was meant to be on a flight back to the UK, but got kicked off last minute to be replaced by VIPs. That plane got shot down and everyone died in it. Miss you, great-grandpa AskReddit. Thank you for all the appreciation. I'm so glad to be able to share his story. 7.92 more's a rifle bullet. When I was 15ish I was very depressed and got very drunk. Found my great-grandfather's WWI captured German rifle. Found some bullets from that time, loaded it, and put the rifle in my mouth, and pulled the trigger. Thankfully the bullet was not loaded properly / was a dud for being 90 years old at the time, and did not fire. Literally, I was walking back to our barracks in Afghanistan talking with my peers and my staff sergeant. We get to one part, my staff sergeant grabbed my collar and pulled me back. Right there was a unexploded 40mm grenade projectile from a launcher sitting where my foot was about to land. Big yikes. 4 Christmases ago I was in Mexico with mom, dad and brother doing some last minute shopping at the local Walmart. We finished our shopping and went to the car. As soon as we were leaving 2 trucks stopped right in front of the main Walmart entrance. They were a cartel and were hunting for the son of one of the opposing cartel's main dudes. They fired a fucking bazooka. I think they got the guy. And then bullets started flying everywhere. My dad was driving. He hit the gas. We almost crashed. Cause there was panic everywhere and we had a red light. The military showed up while we were driving away and a chase ensued. Luckily we were close to the house where we were staying and made it back quite fast. We heard gunshots for the next 3 hours. Dodged some bullets and even a missile that day. So about 20 something years ago, I was on my way to an interview through a suburb of Washington DC. That particular road has you driving at a not so slow speed, with no shoulders and sidewalks with many pedestrians. A woman standing on the sidewalk stepped backwards into the roadway just as I was approaching. Slammed on the brakes, honked, and she turned slightly. I stop and get out, and she's rolling around clutching her foot, wailing about her foot getting rolled over. My heart is hammering. I have no idea how much trouble I'm in, and my brain is ticking away the time to the interview. Pedestrians kept coming up to her to tell her that they saw me run over her foot. Duh, of course you did. After a few minutes of this, the woman stood up, said Merry Christmas, it was definitely nowhere near Christmas, and walked away through the people standing there. I took my dodged bullet with much appreciation, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't get the job FWIW, but a couple of inches and my life could have changed for the worse in so many ways. My first husband and I were separated. He showed up at my apartment building unannounced and someone let him in because they recognized him from when he lived there. He wanted to come upstairs, but I met him in the lobby instead, where there were cameras and other people. He had never been violent towards me, but it didn't feel right to allow him into my space. He asked me to go for a drive with him and I refused. I offered to help him get help, mental health issues, that he refused to treat. He declined and drove away. He was missing for a few days, but turned up several states away visiting a friend. A few days after that he took his own life using a handgun. We found out later that he'd purchased the gun here and headed straight out of town when I refused to get in the car with him. To this day, I'm thankful that I never got in that car with him. He'd never even talked about buying a gun before. I had no idea he was armed. Who knows what would have happened. 5 of my buddies in high school invited me to go cruise around the backcountry roads because we had nothing else to do as teens in Iowa. I was getting ready to go and then decided I just was gonna stay home that night instead. Well, I'm glad I stayed home because their truck rolled several times after sliding out on a gravel road. There was a couple in the bed and they were ejected. One lost his left nut, one ended up in a coma, one ejected through the windshield and the rest had several broken bones and concussions. They all should have died, and I'm very grateful they didn't, but I'm also grateful I chose not to go. Not me, but we were at Arches National Park once. One night there was a lightning storm. The next day we were talking to a park ranger, and she told us that during the lightning storm there were people hiking back from Delicate Arch. A guy on the trail was hit by lightning, stopping his heart. Right behind him on the trail were 2 nurses who immediately started CPR. A minute or so later a cardiac surgeon hiked up and started working on him. They saved his life. My ex-girlfriend that I had been planning to propose to couple months ago, she cussed out my 11-year-old daughter, accused her of trying to break us up, never apologized and then stole our 1-year-old puppy and immediately blocked me on everything. Depression is a bitch, but I thank the creator daily for whoever was looking out for me on that one. Nearly died in a car accident about a month ago. I was extremely shaken up at first and in shock for a few days, but after talking to the psychiatrist there about it, I realized that if the guy driving hadn't crashed the car, I would have been raped by him. I told him I wanted to go home, but he said, my apartment first before driving off, and then we crashed. Probably the biggest bullet I've ever dodged, even if it resulted in internal bleeding. My dad grew up in Safford, a rural town in southeast Arizona. Back in the 1930s kids there got their first .22 caliber rifle at age 5 or 6. He and a friend found an old WWI helmet and my dad suggested he put on the helmet and ricochet a bullet off it to see what it would be like. His friend took aim, but before pulling the trigger said, "Benny, put the helmet on the fence post there to test it first." The bullet went straight through both sides of the helmet. If my dad hadn't dodged that bullet, I could not tell that story. Last year I was cut from the AA hockey team that I usually played on every year because of a scheduling mishap with my lacrosse team's tournament, so I ended up playing A that year. That year a girl gave almost everyone the flu. They didn't make it to provincials, cities or even make it past semis in a tournament. Also the 3 imports, really good players from different leagues invited to play, made everyone on the team's season hell because of their entitled attitude and costing games by taking stupid penalties. While I had a fun team experience with a group of great girls. Went to kill myself by putting a plastic bag over my head and tying it off. Figured it would be less messy to be found. My cat started going crazy on the other side of the door when I started to get lightheaded and feel sort of nauseous. I thought, oh right, you need your dinner and no one else will feed you, and I untied the bag to feed the cat. After the fact I realized my cat literally saved me from one of my lowest points. God, I miss that cat. Still can't believe I came that close. Side hurt and was throwing up. Went to hospital with my mom, who is a nurse. They said it was my gallbladder and they could schedule surgery in 2 weeks. Mom threatened them, not a Karen. Thank God, and they found time for the following day. Turns out it was gangrene and did not contain gallstones, but rather only one stone the size of a baseball. A 1-hour surgery lasted 3+ hours and a 2-day convalescence turned into 2 months. Broke up with an abuser. He told me he wanted to marry me all the time, but he never asked, and he never produced a ring. Thank God. He did get married, and so did I, but I still worry about his wife, even though I have no real connection to her. Drove for about 800 miles without ever realizing that the loud click grinding noise I was hearing was a fried wheel bearing. Mechanic said I was incredibly lucky not to have lost the wheel while driving. I found a new job. Boss seemed nice in the interview. Started working and right from the start people weren't comfortable talking about the job and you could literally smell the fear. Also there was very little work to do. My direct colleague was sick and they wouldn't give me her phone number. I wanted to discuss a few things / strategies to move forward, but everyone kept dodging giving me her number. After 2 days I found I had a headache going there, which got worse during the day, so I quit. Company doesn't exist anymore. I guess you can't run a job agency without customers and everybody just pretending to work. I was living in Paris during the fall of 2015 for my semester study abroad in college. My apartment was right by République, and every Friday night I had a standing reservation at Le Petit Cambodge, a local Cambodian restaurant that had the best wake up at 2 AM dream-worthy noodles. November 11th. My best friend who was studying in Scotland calls me crying that they've been dumped and was hoping I could come for the weekend. I was a little reluctant because I had wanted to go to the Eagles of Death metal concert at the Bataclan that Friday, but hadn't gotten my tickets yet, so said sure and booked a flight for that Friday afternoon, November 13th. When I landed and made it to their apartment, after we went out to dinner I turned on my phone to hundreds of messages. Turns out both Le Petit Cambodge and the Bataclan had been targeted by ISIS and there were more terrorist hits going on in my neighborhood. The best thing my friends ex did was dump them. Otherwise I would have been either at dinner or a concert and more than likely wouldn't be here to write this. Was dating this guy for 4 years, from my 16s to 20s. We were looking to buy an apartment and to get married when he broke up with me. He said he was in love with somebody else because she has a nice body. He always called me fatty and how much weight I gained, and when I told him I was gonna lose weight if he would go grow some muscles at the gym, he said that I was the only one who needed to work out. Anyway, I was so devastated, I cried for so long. I was awful. Fast forward 5 years. Nothing in my life is bad but nothing is good. Just same old same old. I found an exchange program that I could actually afford. I moved from Brazil to US. I travel to so many places. I prove myself so brave. I discover so much about myself. And then I meet the love of my life. He was here waiting for me. We are happily married, building our life together, and he treats me with respect, love, like a queen. And we have a puppy now, and we are planning for the future, and I'm just so happy. I can't believe I almost didn't have this and him. When I was 15, I'm 16 now, I was being manipulated and lied to by a 20-year-old man for sex. I brought the topic on Reddit so people could give me their opinion and a random Redditor helped me snap out of it. A few weeks ago I talked to the 20-year-old and I then completely understood that he just saw me as a walking hole to stick his dick in. Once in my early 20s I ran into a crazy ex-girlfriend at the bar. She really wanted to hook up that night and I really wanted to, but I just started seeing someone new and declined. Then she basically started begging to go home with me, and I just had a really bad feeling about it. It started to get a little weird, but the night went on, and we went our separate ways. A couple weeks later she called me crying, saying she had no one to go to, and asked if I could give her a ride to the abortion clinic. So I did cause I knew she needed help, but I instantly knew if I went home with her that night she would have told me it's my kid. She tried to trap me. My ex. She turned out to be crazy, literally, not the kind of crazy label angry bitchy women get, but actually crazy. She ended up in a state mental hospital for at the very least 1 year mandatorily. But, while we were together, she threatened to kill herself if I left, multiple times. She broke into my apartment and forced me to let her stay the night and cuddle her, wouldn't let me sleep. Fun fact, she cheated on me and gave me gonorrhea. I'm stupid for not leaving her beforehand and just reporting her to the police, but that was the final straw. The bullet I dodged. I didn't get her pregnant. Thank God. Back in middle school, my friend and I would ride our bikes home every day. One day, he was being a jerk, so I left without him. Turns out, he got hit by a car. Luckily, the car barely clipped his bike. so he got away with a broken leg. If I was there, I would have been riding behind him, taking the full force of the car. I, then 18F, met someone through a dumpster fire of a Skype chat group. She basically said the others were losers, but hey, let's be friends. A week or so later she asked me out. I said no, but she laid the pressure on thick, begging me, whining, saying it would mean the world to her. I decided there was no harm in trying. On day 3 she said she loved me. I panicked, said it back, not sure what standard protocol was, as this was my first relationship. On day 4 I realized I wasn't gonna get feelings anytime soon, and broke things off. She threatened suicide. I left anyway. Few days later she sends a previous ex of hers to apologize on her behalf. The ex and I discuss what happened, and the ex tells me the same thing happened to her, only she fell for it, and things got bad. The whole Skype group knew, but they thought our mutual partner had gotten better since then. Last I heard, she finally got kicked from the group after years of preying on insecure newcomers. In the 80s, my family was traveling through the Colorado mountains. We were traveling down a steep run between 2 semi-trailers, the front carrying steel beams and the back uncut timber logs. My dad suddenly got really nervous, later telling us he heard God/a voice yell for him to get out of that lane now. He pulled into the middle lane and started to pass the semi. About 10 seconds later the back tractor smashed into the trailer in front. Still don't know if his brakes gave out or if he fell asleep, but had we stayed we would have all died in a crushed van cube. My dog took it for me. Catahoula leopard/pit mix, both known for their pain tolerance. Took 2 bullets, one through his cheek exiting through his jaw, the other through his chest and out of his armpit. Didn't drop, didn't even whimper, just kept going. He's a fucking tank, has saved me both mentally and physically in life. He's perfectly fine, made a solid recovery after tearing his stitches out multiple times from jumping on the couch. You'd never know. I will forever be in debt to my dog, and he can do whatever he wants. When people talk their dogs up about how tough and loyal they are, I sometimes struggle to keep my mouth closed. My ex-husband and I started talking about having kids. Well, at the time I was on that horrible birth control called Yaz. Remember the class action? Long story short, it made things a little difficult getting pregnant. Fast forward to a few months later, and I find some girl's panties in our apartment. Moved out and started the divorce. Sure enough, he knocked up his girlfriend and ditched her when their kid was only a year old. The guy was such a loser, dodged a bullet on that one. Didn't happen to me, but my sister's ex-husband. He served in the Marines. One night in Afghanistan, he and his squad mates were awoken and told that enemies were seen nearby and were to go check it out. They searched the area on foot where they were last seen, and it's still late at night. Nothing was found. They went back to their base and went back to sleep. Well, in the morning they had other soldiers check it out. Turns out that enemies were indeed there at some point, and multiple IED landmines were found with soldier footprints all around them. It was my ex-brother-in-law's and his squad's footprints, and they managed to somehow miss every one of them. I was running late for class one day and had to park in a different parking lot. Because of that, instead of walking to campus, I took a shuttle since this lot was further away. After class, a friend of mine, who I would have typically walked back to the parking lot with, got hit by a stray bullet in the shoulder while walking back to his car in the parking lot that I would have been in if I was on time. He had to have surgery and there was a short recovery period, but he was fine. I have a tendency to think that had I been walking with him, I could have gotten hit, or he could have been hit in a different spot. It wasn't far from causing major damage to begin with, or our other friend with a blood clotting disorder could have been hit, or something worse. I caught some serious charges 2 years ago when I was addicted to and selling drugs. Wholesale made deals with an undercover cop by a dude who set me up saying it was his dad. Got charged with selling MDMA, cocaine, Adderall, and LSD. I lived in Flagstaff where meth is being cracked down on. If the cocaine I had contained any meth at all, very common when buying off the street, I would have been sentenced around 45 years in prison at 19 years old. Luckily I got a great lawyer, got the charges reduced to possession, and am now 11 months sober, and I'm up for early termination on my probation in 5 days. Me and a friend were bartenders years ago. There was this absolutely beautiful woman that always came in that we clicked with, but she was for the longest time dating what can only be described as a thug. A couple months passed, and they didn't come around. Then I'm off my birthday weekend and run into her. She was out celebrating being single with a few friends. Our parties merged, and we hit it off. Pretty much spent all weekend together, but both realized outside of mutual attraction there wasn't much there between us. I tell my buddy and he asked if it was cool if he asked her out. I was like, go for it. Around their second date they were leaving a restaurant when my buddy was shot twice in the back and she was shot in the head by the thug ex. She died. Thug was caught and my buddy has permanent nerve damage but survived. When I was 24, I was getting ready to propose to my girlfriend. Spent $3,000 on a ring. My proposal plans were over the top. It was gonna be magnificent. 2 weeks before question day, I woke up in the middle of the night to see that I had over a dozen missed calls and texts asking me to call her. I didn't ask what was wrong. Long story short, she had cheated on me with a guy who had rejected her in college. Really glad I kept the receipt for that ring. New Year's Eve 2013. I met a girl at a party. She asked me if I wanted to go to a different party with her. I hopped in her car. I didn't realize how drunk she was until we started driving around. I asked her to stop the car. She didn't. I ended up exiting the vehicle at about 20 miles per hour. I saw her 4 months later by her penstance. She had a huge boot on her leg and crutches. That night, she crashed her car into a cop car. She showed me the pictures. The passenger side, where I would have been sitting, was completely crushed in. If I had survived, I would have lost both my legs. She was so belligerently drunk that night that she actually ended up fighting the police. She didn't stop when I asked her to because she was so belligerently drunk.